I'm now on the second sleeve, so I worked the first sleeve. So we pick up all the way around the sleeve and then work the sleeve from the top down with short rows. So let me show you how to do that on the second sleeve. It's a little bit difficult to film this on an actual full-size sweater because it's knitted in the round, so it's quite big. So by the time you get to the second sleeve, you have the whole sweater plus the first sleeve on your needles. So it is a little bit big and a little bit awkward to knit on, but I do quite like knitting this way. Okay, so I actually picked up around most of the armhole. So normally if you were going to pick up around the armhole for a sleeve, it would make sense to start at the underarm, which is here where my marker is. But for this kind of sleeve, because you're going to do short rows, and the short rows actually start at the shoulder, it makes more sense to start picking up at the shoulder. So I've already joined the shoulders working a 3 needle cast off, which gives you a really nice shoulder join because it matches the rib pattern. So you don't have to worry when you're seaming, you have to make sure you're matching the rib pattern. The 3 needle cast off does that automatically. So as long as you cast off on the wrong side, so you have the right sides together, wrong side facing you, and then you cast off in pattern. So if the next stitch on my needle, on the needle facing me, was a knit stitch, I cast it off knitwise. If it was a purl stitch, I knitted in purlwise. Okay, so I picked up most of the way around, starting at the shoulder seam. I normally recommend that you go 1 stitch in. I actually decided on this to go 1.5 stitch in, just because when I picked up for the first sleeve, I felt like it was looking a little bit loose right on the edge. So normally 1 stitch in would be the recommendation, but you can go 1.5 stitch in. You can go 2 stitches in if you want to. I wouldn't do it on something of this thickness like DK. If I was doing something in lace weight yarn, I might go 2 stitches in, but normally I find 1 stitch or 1.5 stitch looks fine. You want to choose where to go and then follow that same line all the way up. So I'm just going to very quickly count how many stitches I've picked up to see how many I've got left. Now, one thing I have done is I have put a marker halfway. So halfway from the bottom of the armhole to the shoulder, I didn't actually measure it with a tape measure. I just folded the sleeve in half like that, the armhole, sorry, in half like that, and put a marker in the edge. Just helps me to count, so I know by the time I get to the marker, I should be roughly halfway through my pickup. So normally a common pickup ratio is about 3 stitches every 4 rows. This depends a little bit on whether your row tension is accurate. Because on this sweater you've been knitting the armhole till you reach a certain number of centimeters. So if your row tension is a little bit out, then you may have to pick up more or less than 4 stitches every 4 rows, but that's a good guide to start with. 2 stitches every 3 rows or 3 stitches every 4 rows is kind of a rough guide. So I have picked up 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32 stitches, and I want 43 in total. So I've only got 11 left to do. So I'm going 1.5 stitch in. This yarn is quite dark, so I don't know how easy it is to see that, but that's 1 stitch in, and then that's 1.5. As long as you stick to the same line all the way up, that's the main thing. Hang on. 33, 34, 35, then I'm going to skip the next one and go into the next one. 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, so I'm coming up to the shoulder now. 41, 42, 43. And if you find that that last stitch before the shoulder, which I quite often do, is a little bit looser, sometimes I have gone another half a stitch in. But you want to try and make sure you stick to the same line all the way up. So you can see here, it looks nice and neat along the edge here. So I'm just going to quickly count to make sure I'm okay, and then I'm going to show you how to do the short rows. So I've already put a marker at the underarm, which I will need for the beginning of the round when I finish the short row sleeve shaping. So the sleeve cap shaping will be worked by doing short rows. And when I finish that, the beginning of my round will be the underarm. So I've put a marker in the underarm when I was picking up. And now I'm going to put a marker at the shoulder as well. You don't strictly need the marker at the shoulder, but I like to have a marker at the shoulder because it just means that I can keep track of how many stitches past the shoulder I'm working, to make sure that my short rows, I haven't made a mistake or anything. So we want to establish the knit 6 purl 2 stitch pattern, but we're going to start with a purl 2. So the stitch pattern is going to be purl 2 knit 6 purl 1 knit 6 purl 1. So the stitch pattern is purl 1 knit 6 purl 1. So we start here with a purl 1 so that the stitch pattern lines up with the shoulder. Purl 1 knit 1 2 3 4 5 6 purl 1, and then we're going to do that again. So it's an 8 stitch repeat. This is for the smaller size, so the other sizes may vary, so make sure you read the pattern. But for this one I'm going to do 2 4 5 6 purl 1. So I've now worked 16 stitches. So I'm just going to double check. I'm always very careful for the first couple of rows to make sure I get it right, because if I get the first 2 rows right, then the rest will be fine. If I make a mistake on the first 2 rows, then you'll throw the whole sleeve cap out. So I've got 16 stitches here. Now I'm going to do a German short row sleeve cap. In the past, I've always tended to do wrap and turn short rows, but my preferred short rows now are German short rows. So I'm going to do a German short row sleeve cap. So I don't need to wrap or anything, I can just turn. If the pattern is written for wrap and turn short rows and you're doing German short rows, then you have to knit an extra stitch. So if it says to knit 10 stitches and then do wrap and turn, you would knit 11 and then turn. Okay, so depending on how you knit, let me do this English style. We're going to slip the first stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. So I got my yarn at the front, slip the stitch purlwise, and then instead of taking the yarn between the needles to the back or just carrying on purling because the next stitch is a purl stitch, I'm going to take the yarn up and over the right hand needle, and I'm going to pull that yarn really tight. I will link to my regular short row tutorial below so you can see that. But I want to take the yarn up and over the right hand needle and pull it really tight. And then depending on how you purl, you can take the yarn to the front to purl, or unless you purl Norwegian purl like me with the yarn at the back. For the next one, I will show you how to do this continental style. So you're just going to follow the pattern. So that means purl 6, knit 2, purl 6, purl 6, knit 1, and then slip the marker because that's my shoulder, and then I'm going to do the wrong side of the stitch pattern twice. So that's knit 1, purl 6, knit 1, and then I'm going to do that again. So knit 1, purl 6, 1 2 3 4 5 6, and then I'm going to knit 1. Hang on, I can just move this sweater around. It's easier when you have the whole sweater in your lap than on the table. So I should have worked 16 stitches past the shoulder. So this is where having that shoulder marker is quite useful. So I worked 16 stitches past the shoulder, so I'm going to turn. This time I will show you how to do the slip and wrap stitch continental style. So you're going to slip the first stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. So it doesn't matter whether you're on the right side or a wrong side, you always slip the first stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. So I tend to just keep the yarn where it is and put my needle underneath, put my finger on it, and then go into the stitch purlwise. You can take the yarn to the front if you want to, and then put the needle in purlwise and take it off. But then instead of going between the needles to the back, you go over the right hand needle and then pull it. I will just go back and do that one more time, because this is why I think it's just as easy to keep the yarn at the back. So I keep the yarn at the back. If you knit English style, then take the yarn to the front, slip the stitch purlwise, and then pull the yarn over the right hand needle. So Continental style, keep the yarn at the back, put the needle under the working yarn, put your finger on it, into the stitch purlwise, take it off, and you can see the yarn now goes over that needle. So all you need to do is pull it really hard so that you pull up the stitch from below. And then we're going to knit, and now you've got to make sure that you stick to the pattern that you have established. So that means we're going to knit 6, purl 2, knit 6, purl 1, and then we're at the shoulder, so we slip the marker across, and then we're going to purl 1, knit 6, purl 1, and purl 1, knit 6. So you just work till you get to that first double stitch on this side. So every time you turn, it creates this slightly weird looking double stitch. When you get to it, if you forget what you were doing, you will think you've done something wrong. And you're going to work that stitch as a single stitch. So it doesn't matter whether you're on the knit or a purl side, whether that stitch is a knit or a purl stitch, you're going to work it as a single stitch. So we've done our knit 6, so the next stitch will be a purl stitch. So that means we're going to purl that stitch as a single stitch. So it doesn't matter how you purl, just purl that next stitch. And then, because that's the end of our pattern repeat, we need to start a new pattern repeat. So we start with a purl. So the idea is that as you work in these short rows, you establish this purl 1, knit 6, purl 1. So because we had the double stitch was the purl 1 at the end of the repeat, the next stitch is the purl 1 at the beginning of the repeat. So purl 1 and then turn. And then you're going to slip the first stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. So I'll do it English style this time. So slip the stitch purlwise, yarn is at the front, and take the yarn over the right hand needle, pull it really hard, and then take the yarn to where you need to be, whether you're knitting or purling. So the next stitch is actually a knit stitch. So the yarn just stays at the back. But if you were purling and you purl with the yarn at the front, you then take the yarn between the needles to the front so you're ready to purl. And then I'm going to work in the pattern. So you need to be able to recognize the difference between knit and purl stitches. And if you don't, then now's a good time to start. You just need to look and see whether it looks like a knit or purl stitch. So with a purl stitch, you have that bump up against the knitting needle. And if it's a knit stitch, then you have a V shape. Okay, so we're going to work in the pattern till we get to the marker, slip the marker, and then carry on working in the pattern. And you're just going to carry on working until you get to the double stitch on this side. Okay, so that next stitch is the double stitch. It's kind of like looks like two stitches that are kind of looped together. So it does look a bit weird. So we have done 2, 4, 6. So that next stitch is going to be a knit stitch because we've done 6 purl stitches. That means we're going to knit that next stitch. So I'm going to just knit that double stitch as a single stitch. And then I'm going to knit the next one because we then start a new pattern repeat. If you're worried about not being able to see where the double stitch is, then just put a marker when you turn. So I've knitted that next stitch. Turn. If you're worried about missing that double stitch, you can put a marker on the right hand needle after you've turned so that you know that the next time you do a wrong side row, you're your double stitches before the marker. So slip the stitch purlwise with the yarn in front, pull the yarn up and over the right hand needle, and then the next stitch is a purl stitch. So if you purl with the yarn at the front, take the yarn between the needles to the front. I purl with the yarn at the back, so I'm going to keep the yarn there. So we're going to do purl 1, knit 6. Every time you do a wrong side row, you will have worked past the marker the same number of stitches you did on the right side row. So the right side row, if you work 20 stitches past the marker on the right side row and then turn, when you do the wrong side row, you'll be working 20 stitches past the shoulder marker on the wrong side row. So every wrong side row, you'll be working the same number of stitches as you did on the right side row. Obviously you'll be on the purl side, or obviously you'll be on the wrong side, so you may be purling instead of knitting, or knitting instead of purling. If you were doing this in just stocking stitch, then you would just be knitting on the right sides and purling on the wrong sides. So I'm just going to work till I get to that first marker. The way you work out how to start, how many stitches to work for this first section before we did the first turn, is that you take all the stitches you picked up around the armhole, then you divide them by 3, and then you multiply that by 2, so you get 2/3. So say we have 60 stitches in total, divide that by 3, that's 20, times 2 is 40. Now if I have, so I have 60 stitches all the way around, so between the underarm and shoulder will be 30 stitches. So I then take 40 minus 30 is 10, so I then work 10 stitches past the shoulder. So you take the full number of stitches, divided by 3, multiply by 2, then you take that number and take off half the total number of stitches you have, and then that gives you the number of stitches that you need to work past the shoulder. Okay, I need to purl one more before I get to the double stitch. So this time the double stitch is a purl stitch, and then because I've got purl 1 there, purl 2, so the next stitch I'm going to knit is a knit stitch, and then I'm going to turn. So you're just going to gradually incorporate the stitch pattern as you go along. So you need to look at what you've done, and now the next 6 stitches will be knit stitches, then there'll be a purl stitch when I turn, a stitch after I turn, and so on. So you just need to look at your knitting as you turn. I don't know how easy it is to see this, but you can see I've got a few more rows here than I do right down here. So you're going to carry on working back and forth, short rows, back and forth, so that's the other shoulder, till you get to the underarm stitches. So I've now finished the final short row, so the whole sleeve cap is finished. So that's what it looks like when I finish the final short row. So the final short row is a right side row, and I've knitted the double stitch here, and then I have 5 stitches left here for the underarm. Obviously you will have different amount of stitches depending on the size. This is the smallest size, where I had 5 stitches for the underarm, and I've knitted my double stitch there. So I'm going to carry on now. I'm not going to turn, I'm just going to carry on till I get to the marker, and obviously carry on that rib pattern. So I finish with a purl 1, slip the marker across. Now I'm going to start working in the round. So my double stitch from the last short row on this side is here, so I'm going to work the pattern across these underarm stitches. So purl 1, knit 1, 2, 3, 4, and then that's the double stitch. So we're going to knit that one, that's 2, 4, 5, and then knit that one, and then carry on in the pattern. Now you just carry on in the round, and if you have any questions, just ask below this video.